Volodymyr Zelensky responded to Donald Trump's accusations regarding elections and a peace deal, which the U.S. president made in an interview with Politico the day before. In particular, Trump complained that elections should be held in Ukraine because, according to him, the country no longer resembles a democracy. He also insisted that Zelensky would have to agree to the proposed terms, otherwise he would lose. The president of Ukraine responded that he is ready to hold elections if the U.S. and Europe guarantee the security of their conduct. And once again, the president of Ukraine stated that there will be no territorial concessions to the aggressor. TSN's own correspondent in the United States, Olga Koshelenko, has more details.
Donald Trump has once again returned to the topic of "you have no cards" in his public rhetoric. The Financial Times, citing sources in the administration, writes that the United States wants to pressure Ukraine into a deal with Russia by Christmas. The US president, in an interview with Politico, voiced several old accusations. First, the elections. He claims that Zelensky is fighting precisely because he does not want to hold them.
They are using the war as an excuse not to hold elections, but I think the Ukrainian people should have that choice. And maybe Zelensky would win. I don't know who would win. But they haven't had elections for a long time. You know, when people talk about democracy, it gets to the point where it's no longer democracy.
Zelensky responded that he is not clinging to his seat. He will ask the Verkhovna Rada to consider changes to the legislation that would allow elections to be held. Even during martial law, on one condition, the United States must guarantee security.
I am ready for elections. Moreover, I am now asking, and I state this openly, for the United States of America to help me. Together with our European colleagues, it is possible to ensure security for holding the elections, and then, in the next 60 to 90 days, Ukraine will be ready to hold elections. Personally, I have the will and readiness for this.
Without giving any reasons, Trump, who not long ago called Russia a paper tiger that doesn't know how to fight, declared that Moscow is winning, at least because it is much larger than Ukraine in size. Instead of demanding to freeze the war along the line of contact, which Trump voiced back in October, the agenda now again includes the demand to hand over Donbass to Putin. Zelensky will have to agree to a deal, says the US president.
He will have to come to his senses and start accepting reality. You know, when you lose, because he is losing. Or,
do you think that Ukraine is losing this war?
well, they lost territory long before I got involved. They lost an entire stretch of coastline.
In recent days, Zelensky has repeatedly stated that he will not make any territorial concessions to the aggressor. These days, he is coordinating joint proposals with European partners for the American peace plan, which, according to him, currently consists of 20 points. Separate documents outline security guarantees for Ukraine and an economic recovery plan. Europe should also have a say in matters concerning its own security, Zelensky says, and promises to deliver the agreed-upon document to the Americans as soon as possible.
I truly think that we absolutely need to meet again with our esteemed American colleagues who are diligently preparing this important plan. And then, next week, I believe, at the highest leaders level, we should convene. Ukraine and Europe will hold a discussion with our American colleagues. For now, we are not ready to say in what format. Every day we will be taking steps forward regarding the readiness of this plan and other documents.
Another concession that the United States is demanding from Ukraine is to give up NATO membership. In an interview with Politico, Trump talks about this as if it were obvious. In its new security doctrine, the United States has declared that NATO should stop expanding. Such statements are being made without coordination with alliance partners. The US president generally criticized Europe, which in his opinion talks a lot but does nothing. At the same time, as Zelensky said in a comment to journalists, there were no threats to stop selling NATO weapons to Ukraine under the Pearl Initiative. From Washington, USA, Olga Koshelenko, Maxim Shenkarenko, TSN 1+1, Marathon United News.
Next, as is traditional for the morning, the topic is the international section. We analyze events around Ukraine that directly concern us. Right now, we are in a long-term international negotiation track, so there is definitely a lot to talk about. Hlib Ostapenko, political consultant, foreign policy expert, is our guest. Welcome, Hlib, to the broadcast. Well, actually, this project to find peace is not coming to an end in Ukraine. And we are seeing a new round of statements happening. Donald Trump already, this is actually the main news this morning. He stated that elections need to be held in Ukraine. And President Zelensky immediately responded saying that we are ready, just ensure our security. And last night, the president announced that he is returning to Ukraine today and will speak with parliamentarians who are supposed to develop some legislative framework for this. But is this a real project? Or is it more likely just a continuation of this kind of public diplomacy, this time from the US side? An attempt to put pressure on Ukraine?
Well, in my subjective opinion, this is certainly a continuation of diplomatic pressure, because right now we see that basically the issue of elections is being pushed forward from different sides. The Russians have understood why they want elections, to install a fifth column here and then undermine society from within, to destroy what is Ukrainian, which in fact has already proven to be quite resilient in this war for the fourth year now. As we can see, in principle, if we talk about the nature of wars, societies are often less integrated somewhere after at least 2 years of war. Ukraine is quite resilient and its society is resilient as well. If we talk about the position of the United States, they believe that such diplomatic pressure will help push President Zelensky, so that he would agree, in effect, to the de facto surrender of Donetsk region. We absolutely must not take these steps. First of all, not giving up Donetsk region. Secondly, absolutely not restricting the armed forces of Ukraine, because this is essentially the main security guarantee for Ukraine. And additionally, under no circumstances should we legally commit to abandoning our Euro-Atlantic course. Of course, in my subjective opinion, we are already de facto in NATO, let's say, by 60%. These percentages can potentially be increased to 80%. De facto and de jure, that will be when we become full-fledged NATO members, which we ultimately sooner or later will become. Let me explain why. Because we have weapons, we have F-16S, we have agreements regarding Gripens and Mirages, we have high-tech weaponry, and we have a capable army that understands the nature of this war. And that's why, well, it often doesn't really matter what's written on paper. What truly matters is that we have technology exchange.
There's enough political will.
As usual. But the point here is simply this. Take the example of the Budapest Memorandum. There was a lot written on that piece of paper, some kind of agreement, but in reality, no one actually protected us fully under the terms of that document. That's why it's important that this isn't just NATO's Article 5 on paper, but that there are real agreements about further actions to strengthen Ukraine's power, the resilience of society, and so on. As for Zelensky's response, I think that in principle, in my subjective opinion, it was quite appropriate diplomatically. Well, look, if you're putting on pressure, then let's ensure security within the country so that the people who are currently defending our state can vote, so that we can provide the opportunity for the approximately 5 to 7 million people who are outside the country to also vote properly, and so that there is truly a stable and adequate situation in Ukraine during the electoral cycle. Because, as we know, well, first of all, sometimes we end up destroying ourselves from within our own society. And secondly, Russia will do everything it can to break us apart, not on the front lines, but somewhere in the center of Kyiv.
Well, now Trump could come out with the next statement and say, all right, sign this peace agreement and go to elections. Here are your security guarantees.
Well, I think that Trump, in general, in my own subjective opinion as well, doesn't always understand the nature of this war. He can make all sorts of statements, their diplomacy is chaotic, and their position changes every 2 weeks. With the Russians, we exchange ICBMs, Poseidons, and supposedly attempts to test our nuclear weapons. Then, Witkoff and Kushner come to Moscow and have a great time strolling through the sparkling city with lanterns and all those New Year's decorations, in contrast to
The dark Kyiv.
Yes, in contrast to the dark Kyiv. But, given the nature of our society, it seems to me that for Kyiv, sometimes even it's more resilient in this darkness, not in terms of comfort, but in terms of understanding what we feel, what we are fighting against. And I don't think our society is afraid of the lack of electricity or of some kind of darkness. On the contrary, in some cases, it even hardens us. But of course, structural reforms need to be made, and our energy workers are doing everything possible to restore the power so that we can charge our phones, heat up some food, and so on. It's a complex process.
Mr. Hlib, I want to bring you back to the topic of NATO. You said so optimistically that we're already 60% there, that 80% is ours. Potentially we can be there, but will we ever make it to 100%? My next question is, will we even live to see the moment when NATO still exists at all? After all, Republican Congressman Thomas Massie has introduced a bill for the United States to withdraw from NATO. And on top of that, a new U.S. strategy has emerged, which states, well, listen, this is an absolutely controversial version when the United States says that Russia is their strategic partner, while NATO, the European part of NATO, says that Russia is a strategic enemy. And I can confirm this because I heard these statements with my own ears since I just returned from Brussels from the meeting of foreign ministers. And there I literally saw how the ministers came out one after another, simply repeating the same point over and over again. Russia threatens us. We need to unite.
I think that here I'll try to be as brief as possible on each point. First of all, this Masi, he has been trying for quite a while to push all these stories about the United States leaving NATO. He is in the Republican Party, but he often doesn't follow the general line of the Republican Party. He's an outsider individualist, but at the same time, he's not a magician. He's a radical libertarian who tries to revise the very nature of the United States' foreign policy role as the world's policeman. He believes that America should focus on itself and its own security. As for Russia and this new strategy, well, it's clear that America is naively trying to pull the Russian Federation away from China's influence and their partnership. It's naive because it's impossible, since the Russian Federation, although not completely, has significantly increased its dependence on the PRC over the past 4 years. Thirdly, this new national strategy is essentially shooting themselves in the foot on the part of the United States, because 15 to 20 years ago, they could have potentially continued as the sole primary hegemon, but now they are de jure officially creating a precedent by what they are saying. Look, this is the nature of actions in international relations. We are moving along the same trajectory. The Netherlands lost its empire, Great Britain lost its influence, France lost its influence. And now, by the nature of international relations and geopolitics, we are potentially going to lose ours as well. And even if the Democrats come back in 2028 and make some sort of revision, it still can't be fully restored because the cup has already been broken. You can glue it back together, but it will never be as beautiful as it once was.
But we see that the more loudly and forcefully the states talk about withdrawing from European affairs, the more strongly Europeans unite around Ukraine. In particular, President Zelensky's visit to London. It concluded with a large number of statements from European leaders. British Prime Minister Starmer emphasized that if we talk about a ceasefire, it must be fair and lasting. For us, it is important to stress again and again that everything concerning Ukraine must be decided by Ukraine. French President Macron stated that he believes we have many advantages in our hands. Ukrainians continue to resist in this war, and the Russian economy is beginning to experience difficulties. And the German Chancellor said that he is skeptical about some of the details we see in the documents from the US side. But we need to talk about this. Why are Europeans so united around us and spending so much time communicating with us and supporting us?
And most importantly, is it too late for them to have woken up? I
think that in principle Europe is gradually waking up, and that's a good thing. If we talk about whether it's too late, they often mentioned these, by the way, sovereign assets. And as soon as it became too late, the Americans got involved. They started to become more active. As far as I understand, by December 18th to 19th, there should be some kind of consensus reached before the European Council meeting. If we talk about the meeting in London, then in my subjective opinion, the following has taken shape. It's not just a coalition of the willing, but a consensus that we are essentially creating a European NATO. And de jure, a European NATO exists within the European continent, but de facto Ukraine will be firmly integrated positively, irreversibly, into this process. Because without Ukraine, Europe cannot be secure. We have a capable army, and despite all the difficulties and challenges, we fight the Russians better than anyone else because we understand how to fight them. And it's clear that Europeans see the steps that the United States is taking, sometimes as part of not the most ethical dealings with the Russians. And I am confident that now, even if you look at Chancellor Merz, it's not only Ukraine that is seeking help from Germany in shaping this framework. Communication with the states, but Israel is doing the same thing. We can see that there are indeed precedents showing that there is no peace in the Middle East. Hamas remains armed, and Israel is intensifying some of its attacks despite the ceasefire. And there was a meeting between Merz and the Israelis. They are ramping up this narrative, and Ukraine is doing the same. I'm not saying that Ukraine and Israel are the same cases, but what I'm saying is that right now, Germany, France, Belgium, Britain is also strengthening this mutual communication with Ukraine in order to, first of all, to be independent actors, fully fledged participants in the negotiations, and to have their own clear European position. Secondly, to strengthen the position of official Kyiv, because Europeans understand much better what this war is about than the Americans do. Just as a brief example, we know little about what is happening in Puerto Rico, Venezuela, or somewhere in Cuba. But we do understand what is happening in Poland or Lithuania. It's the same with the Americans. They have to know a lot because, after all, they are still the world's policemen. But the claim about Crimea being surrounded on all four sides by the ocean pretty clearly illustrates what is actually going on in Donald Trump's mind regarding this whole specific situation, regarding ending the war on Ukrainian territory.
They are still playing the role of the world's policeman, but we see how America is moving toward isolationism. I can't even pronounce it, but nevertheless. We see that this is the strategy of the United States, that they want to close themselves off in their own part, to focus more on confronting China. How long will Trump keep pressuring Ukraine in the context of these peace negotiations that are currently underway?
I think that right now there are three possible scenarios that could unfold. First of all, understanding. Donald Trump realizing that Putin is not ready to engage in full-fledged peace negotiations, and as a result, the potential for increased sanctions and financial pressure, possibly even a tougher diplomatic stance, and perhaps the provision of more weapons through the NATO pipeline and then from NATO to Ukraine. Secondly, he might distance himself until around the end of February or March of 2026, after which he will realize that the majority of the American electorate supports him in his support for Ukraine, and he will take further steps, especially since in parallel there will also be the midterm elections for Congress. And thirdly, he might simply end this war within a short period of time. But whether this will happen, in my subjective opinion, the likelihood of this in the coming month is the lowest. So it's either the first scenario or the second. The third is possible, but very unlikely. Possible, let's put it that way.
We will simulate according to these scenarios. Very interesting.
The latest statement from the Financial Times, they write that Trump gave Zelensky only a few days to respond to the U.S. peace proposal, which involves ceding part of Ukrainian territories in exchange for vague security guarantees from Washington. Trump is aiming to reach an agreement before Christmas? Well, we'll see.
There isn't much time left until Christmas.
Well, it's already been a year since Trump said he'd end this war in one day, so...
Listen, for those who watched that Politico interview closely there, 9 of them are already finished. Hlib Ostapenko, political consultant and foreign policy expert.